Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Thomas Grain moved to Birchview Glen, he expected peace, not a war with the neighborhood HOA. But behind the jam baskets and friendly smiles lurked a twisted plan to take his home. What began as kindness turned into surveillance, forgery, and a fight for everything he owned. Moving to Birchview, Glen was supposed to be the beginning of something peaceful, a fresh chapter. My wife Julia and I had worked hard for this house, and our son Zach was finally at the age where he could enjoy a real backyard instead of a cramped city park. We bought the property directly from an older couple, retired teachers, who made it clear that the house stood within the Birchview Glen neighborhood, but was not under the jurisdiction of the local HOA. That detail was gold to me. I didn't want anyone telling me what kind of mailbox I could install or if my garbage cans were too close to the curb. Freedom was half the reason we moved here. The place was perfect, nestled at the edge of the neighborhood, with pines flanking the property like guards and the Rocky Mountains looming in the distance. Mornings came with birdsong and the kind of silence you forget exists when you live in the city. I'd sip my coffee and watch deer drift between trees like ghosts. It felt like our own little kingdom. The very first morning after the move, we got our first visitor. A tall, sharp-smiled woman in her 50s approached the front porch, holding a woven basket filled with preserves and baked goods, like she'd stepped out of a Midwest postcard. She introduced herself as Karen Blackwood, president of the Birchview Glen HOA. She wasn't wearing a sash, but her posture made it clear she considered herself royalty. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice like sugar over ice. "We know your property isn't technically under the HOA umbrella, but around here, we like to think of ourselves as one big family." I smiled, cautious. "Appreciate that. We're still settling in, but it's been lovely so far." She handed me a glossy pamphlet titled Life in Birchview Glen and nodded toward the basket. "Just a few things from the neighbors. Some of us baked, and there's jam from the Millers on Brookview Lane. Oh, and we've included our community directory. Even if you're not in, we'd like to keep everyone included." I thanked her, and she smiled like someone who knew the ending of a story she hadn't told yet. Over the next few weeks, the HOA's helpfulness ramped up like an overeager in-law. One morning, a landscaping truck showed up and started mowing our lawn. When I walked out to say they had the wrong house, the driver waved and said, "Karen sent us." "No charge, Mr. Grain. We take care of our own." I tried to decline, but the guy insisted, said it was already handled. Then came the sewer line hookup. A pair of workers showed up, saying the HOA had approved connecting our home to the upgraded neighborhood system. Again, no cost, all arranged. I was skeptical, but checked with the city. The permit was real, and the hookup was legit. All I had to do was sign a utility update form, which I did, thinking nothing of it. The week after, someone offered to clean out our gutters. Again, community initiative, no charge. It all seemed generous to a fault. Julia and I had long conversations at night, wondering if we'd missed something in the paperwork. She thought maybe they were just trying to make a good impression. I wasn't so sure. Still, it was hard to argue with free labor. They even invited us to a neighborhood cookout. I stood in the backyard with a paper plate of ribs while Karen introduced us to everyone like a proud aunt. People were friendly. Too friendly, maybe. There was an edge to the smiles I couldn't quite place. It felt a little like joining a country club where you hadn't paid dues, but they still gave you a locker. I kept waiting for a catch. It didn't come. Not then, anyway. One night, sitting on the back deck with Julia, I said, "I feel like I'm in one of those horror movies where the neighbors bring pie, then try to sacrifice you to the HOA gods." She laughed and nudged me. "Maybe they're just nice." "Maybe," I said. But even then, I didn't believe it. I started to notice little things. HOA volunteers raking pine needles from the public paths would glance toward our house more than the others. A few cars would slow down when driving past, then speed up once I looked their way. I chalked it up to curiosity. We were the newcomers after all. Still, the feeling lingered, like I was being watched. Not in a creepy way, more evaluated. But nothing concrete happened. No weird letters, no passive-aggressive notes about lawn clippings or curtain colors. Just kindness. That's what made it unnerving. Because where I come from, nobody gives you something for free unless they expect something back. And I had a sinking feeling they were going to collect soon. About 2 months after we'd moved in and finally begun to feel settled, I came back from a run to find a thick envelope tucked into our mailbox. It was the kind of envelope that tries too hard to look friendly. Bright blue with cursive lettering and a Birchview Glen HOA seal embossed in gold on the back. I carried it inside, sweating into the hardwood floor, and tossed it on the counter. Julia raised an eyebrow. "More cookies from Karen?" she asked, wiping down Zach's breakfast mess. "Feels heavier. Maybe it's a casserole recipe and a non-disclosure agreement." We both laughed. Later that afternoon, I opened it, fully expecting some community newsletter or another overly polished invitation to a block party with organic fruit platters and HOA-approved music. But it wasn't a party invitation. It was a letter addressed formally to Mr. Thomas Grain, printed on thick stock, with a logo at the top and paragraphs that reeked of polished entitlement. Dear Mr. Grain, in anticipation of the upcoming annual Birchview Glen Presentation Week, we would like to formally request your temporary cooperation. As your property represents a key aesthetic node within our visual corridor, we are kindly requesting that you vacate your home from Friday morning through Sunday evening. This will allow our media team to conduct professional staging and filming of promotional content designed to showcase the elegance and harmony of Birchview Glen. We guarantee the integrity of your belongings and home will be preserved. We appreciate your cooperation and look forward to working together to elevate our community's image. Sincerely, Karen Blackwood, President, Birchview Glen HOA. I read it 3 times, out loud, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Vacate? For filming? Julia asked, blinking. Did they just ask to Airbnb our house for free? Number worse. They want to stage it like it's theirs. I shoved the letter toward her. They want to pretend our home is part of their damn catalog. That night, I sat down and wrote a calm but very direct response, explaining that I was not a member of the HOA, had never agreed to anything of the sort, and would absolutely not be vacating my home for any kind of filming or promotion. I printed it, signed it, scanned it, and emailed it to the return address on the letter. Then, just to be safe, I dropped a hard copy in their Dropbox at the HOA office building down the road. I figured that was the end of it. Wrong. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one was more forceful, less sugar-coated. It started by regretting my lack of cooperation and ended with a passive-aggressive warning. Please be advised that under Resolution 11B, Birchview Glen HOA retains limited rights to utilize visual and physical assets located within community zones and development corridors. Your non-compliance may be reviewed as obstruction of authorized operations. Resolution 11. B. I'd never heard of that because I had never signed anything. I was not in the HOA. My house wasn't covered by any corridor usage clause or whatever legalese they were trying to throw at me. I stared at the paper like it might catch fire from sheer stupidity. Julia looked up from the dining table. They're escalating. They're bluffing, I said. Although I wasn't sure anymore. They're trying to test how far they can push. The next morning, things got physical. I was grabbing the mail and noticed a small metal sign on my front lawn. It hadn't been there yesterday. White background, red letters. Work area, do not enter without permission. Birchview. Glen HOAI stood there, holding my coffee like it was a weapon, trying to process what I was looking at. No phone call. No permission, just a claim. On my property. I yanked the sign out of the ground and marched straight back inside. By noon, I'd called my lawyer. By 2, I'd filed a report with the local police for unauthorized posting on private property. Later that evening, I reviewed the original sale documents, deed, title records, everything, and it was all clear. Our property had never been under HOA governance. The language was airtight. The old couple we bought it from had specifically opted out of joining the association when the neighborhood was developed years ago. It wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore, it was a move. A bold one meant to test my limits. I sent a second letter, more formal this time, written by my attorney, warning the HOA to cease and desist any claims or signage involving my property. We included all the legal proof, notarized and bulletproof. No reply came. But the silence. It wasn't relief. It was the kind of silence that smells like gasoline right before a match gets lit. By now, I didn't just suspect something was off. I knew it. Karen and her HOA weren't just playing neighborly games anymore. They were laying groundwork for something bigger, something colder. The fake legalese, the sign on my lawn, the smug silence afterward, it all stank. So I called Nate Colburn. Nate was my lawyer. Not some bloodless suit from a strip mall, but the kind of attorney who kept every receipt, read every footnote, and had sued 2 banks for creative interpretation of zoning law, and won. We sat in my home office the following morning, papers spread across the table, coffee strong and black between us. She invoked a non-existent clause, he said, flipping through the HOA letter like it was a bad novel. Resolution 11. B doesn't exist in county records, in state code, or in their own charter, which I just pulled this morning. That's fabricated. He held up the deed. This document explicitly states you're not subject to HOA oversight. You have the full property title, unrestricted. I exhaled. So they're bluffing. They were, he said. Until now. He dropped a bomb. They filed a document with the county assessor's office last week. I found it during the property trace this morning. It's a voluntary annexation agreement, signed and dated by you. I froze. I never signed anything. I know, Nate said, because the signature isn't yours. He spun the paper around. It was my name, my address, my house, a form declaring that I had voluntarily submitted my property to Birchview Glen HOA jurisdiction, dated 2 weeks ago. The signature was close, too close, but it wasn't mine. Nate already had a forensic handwriting analyst on speed dial. Within 48 hours, we had an expert affidavit confirming the signature was forged. The HOA had officially attempted to record my home as part of their jurisdiction, likely in preparation for whatever stunt they were planning with their media presentation. They're trying to paper trail you, Nate muttered, pacing. Retroactive justification. First, they fake the submission, then they act like they have temporary rights to use your property, then they escalate. That night, I couldn't sleep. Julia tried to stay calm for Zach's sake, but I could see the tension on her face. Our home, our refuge, was being stalked by bureaucracy in a cardigan, so I hired a private investigator. Not some trench coat wearing cliché, but a sharp, quiet woman named Celeste, who came highly recommended from one of Nate's contacts. Within hours, she'd started pulling tax records, contractor permits, and property filings connected to Birchview Glen HOA and its leadership. Her first report stunned me. Apparently, Karen had been shopping our home, my home, to a group of real estate consultants she referred to as image consultants. Celeste found an internal memo from a marketing firm detailing a plan to stage and showcase property number 43 as a model unit for prospective investors. In the memo was a chilling phrase. Pending full integration into the HOA charter, property number 43 will be utilized as a test site for Birchview. Premium. Target yield, $175,000 annually via short-term leases and event. Hosting, they weren't just lying. They were planning to profit off my home. Celeste also discovered email communications between Karen and a landscape firm suggesting that my front lawn was already scheduled for modification in line with community visual standards. All of this without my knowledge, let alone consent. I couldn't believe it. My face burned with anger reading the emails. The polite smiles, the jam basket, the "your family here," all of it was bait. And I had taken it. I'd let them mow my lawn, clean my gutters, run sewer lines onto my land. They were building a case, step by step, pretending it was generosity. But in their eyes, it was leverage. I walked the property line that evening, flashlight in hand, and realized that almost everything they'd done, the pipework, the lawn care, had created visual continuity with the rest of Birchview Glen. From the curb, you'd never know this house wasn't one of theirs. That wasn't kindness. It was branding. So we pushed back. Nate sent cease and desist letters to Karen and the HOA board with a full legal packet outlining the fraud, the forged document, and the fabricated resolution. We submitted a claim to the county office, challenging the annexation record and requesting its immediate nullification. We filed a preliminary complaint with the district attorney's office for forgery and attempted property fraud. Still, the HOA said nothing. But then, at 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the camera feed. 2 people in dark jackets were walking slowly through my backyard, one of them shining a flashlight at the gutters, the other holding a tablet and taking notes. One of them was Karen. I turned up the volume on the camera and caught her voice. "It's almost ready. Once this is finalized, we can have the photographer here within 72 hours. He'll love the elevation lines. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I installed 2 more cameras and upgraded the recording storage to a cloud backup. The gloves were off, and this wasn't going to end with a friendly HOA email. The thing about cameras is, they don't lie, they don't exaggerate, and they don't forget. And when you watch someone creeping through your yard at 2 in the morning with a flashlight and a tablet, there's no more room for pretending this is just a misunderstanding. That morning, over coffee, I showed Julia the footage. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her hands just clenched tighter and tighter around the mug until I thought the ceramic might snap. "I want them gone," she said quietly. We were way past wanting. I called Celeste, our investigator, and told her I wanted everything. Full background on Karen Blackwood, her time on the HOA board, any shady property deals, lawsuits, complaints, anything. She didn't blink. "Give me 48 hours, she said. "I'll give you their skeletons." Then I made a few purchases. 4 new cameras with night vision and wireless streaming. Motion-activated floodlights. A sign that read 24-hour surveillance. "All trespassers will be prosecuted." I placed it where that smug little HOA sign had once stood. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was baiting the trap. 2 nights later, it paid off. Karen came back. This time, she wasn't alone. The footage caught 3 people. Karen and 2 men in matching HOA-branded jackets walking directly into my backyard. They weren't sneaking. They moved like they owned the place. One man started measuring the patio dimensions. The other was taking pictures. Karen stood in the center of my lawn with a tablet, tapping something, then gesturing toward the fire pit I'd built last month. "This needs to go," she said. "It's not uniform, and we'll need overhead shots, drone footage probably. No wires or solar panels visible. That porch railing's fine though, very alpine modern." I sat there in my home office watching it live, my hand hovering over the phone. Then the second man pulled something from his bag. A sign. Birchview Glen HOA branding. Glossy. Large. He hammered it into the grass just past the garden bed. "Future home of Birchview Premium." I dialed the police with my hands shaking. They arrived 10 minutes later. I met them at the front porch with a laptop in hand. "Everything you need is right here," I said. "They're in my backyard right now. I didn't invite them. I didn't authorize anything. I want to press charges for trespassing." I walked the officers around to the side of the house where the floodlight clicked on. The look on Karen's face when it hit her was a thing of beauty. Deer in headlights, only angrier. She straightened up like she had a badge instead of a clipboard. "This is a misunderstanding," she said immediately, voice clipped, professional. "Mr. Grain and I have a pending agreement." "No," I said flatly. "We don't." The officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, please step back." Karen opened her mouth to argue, then noticed the camera mounted under the eaves of the roof. I could see her calculating. She knew she'd been caught. But what really sealed it? The key. When one of the HOA guys was asked how they got inside the yard, he casually said, "Karen gave us the spare." Then his eyes widened as if he realized what he'd just said. There was no spare. Not for them. That lock had only 2 keys. One was in my pocket. The other was in the drawer inside our kitchen. Later, we'd find out that one of the contractors hired by the HOA weeks earlier during their oh-so-generous lawn care project had replaced the lock under Karen's orders. That was the day I'd been stuck in traffic, and Julia had been out with Zach. We hadn't even noticed. The police separated them, took statements, and, after a tense exchange, took Karen and both men in for questioning. Not under arrest. Not yet. But close enough that I could see Karen finally begin to realize she was no longer running this game. That night, Celeste came through. She brought a flash drive, a folder, and the kind of grin someone wears when they know something explosive is about to land. She'd found it all. Internal HOA emails, archived from a staffer who had recently quit the board and still had access to the shared Google Drive. Meeting minutes, backroom plans, even a PowerPoint deck. Yes, a PowerPoint titled Phase 2, Strategic Property Integration. My house? Property number 43. There it was, in black and white. Target acquisition, convert property number 43 into HOA-managed demo site for promotional leases and long-term strategic rentals. Projected annual income, $175,000 USD post-integration. They weren't just trying to coerce me into membership. They were planning to absorb my home into a corporate rental scheme, use it to attract investors. Listed as a short-term luxury property with authentic mountain ambiance. without my knowledge, without my consent. They'd even included floor plan renderings with new interior design suggestions. In one slide, they'd literally photoshopped Julia and Zach out of a family photo hanging in our entryway. Karen had stood in my yard and said, "We're one big family." And now she was digitally erasing mine. It was no longer a civil dispute. This was a war. By the end of that week, I knew exactly what kind of enemy I was dealing with. Karen wasn't just ambitious. She wasn't just crooked. She was desperate. And desperate people don't walk away quietly. They double down. After the incident with the trespassing and the footage I turned over to the police, the air around Birchview Glen didn't settle. It hardened, like concrete setting around my ankles. It started with the flyers. One morning, I walked outside to get the paper and saw a pink leaflet taped to my mailbox. Same thing on my neighbors and the house across the street. I pulled it off and unfolded it, already bracing for the absurdity. Warning: dangerous resident among us. Birchview Glen HOA is aware of escalating behavior from Thomas Grain, a non-member resident whose repeated refusal to cooperate with community safety guidelines poses a risk to our families. While we encourage neighborly compassion, we also encourage caution. If you notice any unusual activity on or around property number 43, report it immediately to HOA security. Protect Birchview Glen. Protect each other. There was a photo of me, cropped from a community barbecue 2 months ago, my mouth mid-chew, eyes half closed, like some deranged mugshot. It looked like I was about to swallow a toddler whole. Julia stared at it in silence. "They're trying to paint us as the freaks," she said finally. "And not even good freaks," I muttered. Could have at least used a flattering picture. We started finding the flyers everywhere. Grocery store bulletin boards, coffee shop windows. Inside the library by the community printer, one parent said they'd seen a few being passed around after a PTA meeting. Then came the anonymous letter, unmarked envelope, no return address, just a typewritten page with one sentence. You either become part of the community or you leave it. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. The threat was clear enough, and subtlety wasn't Karen's strong suit anyway. That same night, Julia's vegetable garden was destroyed, not vandalized, reshaped. The soil had been carefully turned, the plants uprooted with surgical precision, and a cheap plastic sign stuck in the center. It read, "Future site of Birchview Clubhouse expansion conceptual rendering phase." Julia stood there at sunrise, staring at the mess in silence. Then she picked up the sign and snapped it in half over her knee. She didn't say anything for the rest of the morning. But later, when she came back from the store, she bought a 12-pack of private property no trespassing signs and installed every single one herself. I didn't stop her. Meanwhile, Celeste kept digging. She'd unearthed more than emails. She found budget records, HOA expenditures that listed property prep, Unit 43, and media consultation, owner reluctance contingency. They had a line item for bribery. They literally budgeted for owner incentives if resistance persists. Karen wasn't freelancing. She had a board, a budget, a plan, and they had been using neighborly favor as soft infiltration. Nate, my lawyer, escalated the legal battle. He filed a formal complaint for criminal fraud and forgery. We submitted the footage and the forged annexation documents to the county prosecutor's office. A legal investigation was opened. But it was going to take time. Too much time. And the neighborhood wasn't waiting. I started getting dirty looks at the gas station. One neighbor who used to wave when jogging past now crossed the street when she saw me watering the lawn. A teenager on a bike flipped me off and yelled, "Freeloader," as he passed. No one corrected him. HOA meetings became rallies. Karen and the board turned my resistance into an obstruction of progress. They told people I was preventing community upgrades, investment opportunities, and increased property values. They spun it into a cause. And me? I became the enemy of harmony. One day I found Zach's soccer ball slashed open on the driveway. Next day, someone spray-painted the word "Lone Wolf" across our mailbox in red. Julia cleaned it off before Zach saw. I installed another camera. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get more surreal, I got served. An official-looking man rang my doorbell at 6 in the morning and handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal letter of citation from the Birchview Glen HOA. You are hereby notified that your actions and continued presence constitute a direct violation of Birchview Glen Cohesion Policy Clause 12A. You are expected to appear before the HOA Compliance Board at the next general meeting to discuss potential solutions up to and including voluntary relocation, compliance negotiation, or enforced restriction of activity within the district. Nate laughed when he read it. None of this is enforceable, he said. They're making up bylaws like it's an improv show. But it didn't matter that it wasn't legal. They were dragging me into a kangaroo court with plastic rules and fake judges. And I had no control over how the neighbors saw it. HOA had weaponized the concept of community. I wasn't living in a neighborhood anymore. I was behind enemy lines. After the citation, I knew we'd reached a new level of delusion. The HOA wasn't just trying to take control of my property. They were trying to rewrite reality, inventing policies, forging documents, vandalizing my garden. It was like living next to a polite cult with matching jackets. But nothing prepared me for what came next. Julia took Zach to visit her sister in Denver for the weekend. I told them it was for a break, a mental reset. But truthfully, I wanted them gone, out of the house, safe, because I had a plan. The cameras were all upgraded, infrared, cloud-synced, multi-angle. The lawn signs were everywhere now. Private property, no trespassing, armed monitoring. But if Karen and her drones had taught me anything, it's that they didn't care about boundaries unless they were painted HOA beige. So I did something risky. I made the house look empty, lights off, car gone, blinds shut, even left the recycling bins at the curb to mimic a weekend absence. And then I waited. Motion sensors on my phone were dialed in. One in the backyard, one at the side gate, one in the garage window. At 2:40 in the morning, they arrived. 4 people. Karen, of course, and 3 men. 2 in the same HOA-branded windbreakers, 1 in plain clothes, dragging a black duffel that looked a little too professional. They came in through the side gate, with a key. That was the first thing that set my pulse racing. We had changed the locks 2 weeks ago, which meant someone had been back. Someone had copied the new key. And now they were using it to enter my house. I watched it live, heart pounding. They came in through the back door, careful, quiet, but not sneaky. Not like burglars, like a crew. One guy immediately started repositioning the furniture in the living room, angling chairs, fluffing pillows. Another began opening closets and cabinets, pulling out personal items and stuffing them into a bin labeled non-compliant visuals. Karen moved with a clipboard, barking orders in hushed tones. Get the dining room symmetrical, remove the personal photos. That hallway needs lighting. Where's the staging mirror? It wasn't just trespassing. It was staging. They were trying to make the house look like an empty model unit, not lived in. Marketable. Then the 4th guy walked out onto the front porch with a small wall-mounted camera in his hand. He began installing it on my house. I hit the intercom from the surveillance app. My voice blasted through the porch speaker. Smile, Karen. You're live on 4 feeds and already 2 minutes into a felony. The reaction was beautiful. She spun like a cat tossed in a bathtub. One of the men dropped the bin and bolted for the door. The guy on the porch froze, camera in hand, halfway screwed into my siding. And Karen. She squared her shoulders, walked to the camera by the entryway, and actually smiled. You're going to regret this, Thomas. I already didn't. I'd already called the police before they even crossed the threshold. When the first squad car rolled up, the house lights flicked on automatically, part of the system I'd programmed. The second floodlight activated, bathing the front yard in harsh white. The sirens came next. Karen and her crew tried to explain, of course. Claimed I'd granted verbal staging rights. Claimed there'd been a scheduling mix-up. Claimed they were preparing the property for public viewing under the HOA's developer clause. None of which was true. None of which mattered. Because I had it all on video, including the moment one of them, in a panic, pulled out their phone and opened an app clearly connected to a security system dashboard. For my house. They'd been trying to remotely access the smart lock, thermostat, lighting. Karen had tried to digitally hijack my home. The police separated them and detained Karen on the spot. One of the officers told me flat out, "We've had HOA disputes before, but this is something else." Later, after the last cruiser left and the scene was sealed off, I walked through the house with Nate and Celeste, both of whom had shown up when the news broke. On the coffee table, in a leather folder Karen had left behind, we found it. Her laptop. And inside it, the full blueprint. A project file labeled Phase 3, Integration and Monetization. It included investor decks, floor plans, event calendars, projected rental incomes, and a horrifying phrase that made Julia curse when I read it to her the next morning. Property number 43. Staging complete. Activation target Q3. Annual ROI $175,000 based on event hosting and high-tier short-term rental demand, pending full transfer of rights through asset repurposing. They weren't just trespassing. They weren't just trying to force us into the HOA. They were trying to seize the house, rebrand it, market it, and eventually replace us. This wasn't just criminal, it was strategic warfare in khakis and soft voices, and they had finally lost control of the story. The morning after the break-in, my home felt less like a house and more like a crime scene with furniture. Police tape still fluttered around the side gate. The back door was temporarily sealed until we could replace the lock. Again. Karen's abandoned laptop sat on the kitchen table like a cursed relic, and Julia kept glancing at it like it might sprout legs and crawl back to the HOA office. We weren't just in a neighborhood dispute anymore. We were in the middle of a criminal case, and I was ready to press every single charge. That afternoon, Nate and I drove to the county courthouse. He filed official complaints for criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, attempted unlawful access of private digital systems, and unauthorized entry with intent to commit conversion. That last one, the intent to rebrand and repurpose our home, was going to be fun in front of a judge. I also filed a personal civil suit against Karen Blackwood and the Birchview Glen HOA board for emotional distress, property damage, and attempted theft via fraudulent annexation. Meanwhile, Karen, she got booked. The local news ran the story within 24 hours. Local HOA president arrested in alleged property staging scheme. The article was vague, probably on advice of legal, but the photo said everything. Karen being led to a cruiser, still in her branded jacket, mouth set in a tight, bitter line. The fallout came fast. 3 board members resigned within days, citing unexpected complications. One of them, Celeste discovered, had been the anonymous tipster who leaked those internal HOA documents. Apparently, he'd thought Karen was stretching the rules, but never expected her to break into a house and stage it for rentals. The community fractured. Some neighbors, finally free of the HOA's spell, emailed us apologies. One even dropped off a box of fresh vegetables and a note that simply said, "We were wrong." Another offered to help replant Julia's destroyed garden. Small things, but they mattered. But others doubled down. Someone left dog poop smeared across our driveway one night. Another neighbor shouted traitor from their porch while I was unloading groceries. I didn't care, because now it was official. The county attorney's office confirmed that the forged annexation document Karen submitted was not just invalid, it constituted felony fraud, the key duplication and entry into the home, felony breaking and entering, the forged signature, criminal impersonation. She was facing multiple charges. Bail was denied. She wasn't going anywhere, but it wasn't enough for me to see her in jail. I wanted the entire structure, the whole HOA apparatus that enabled this madness, taken down and deauthorized. So Nate filed a motion to dissolve the HOA charter. He backed it with video evidence, the forged annexation paperwork, the internal project documents from Karen's laptop, and, most importantly, the county land records that clearly showed I had never been part of their jurisdiction. The HOA had committed institutional fraud, operating beyond its legal boundaries. Worse, it had spent member dues on the illegal acquisition and planned monetization of private, non-member property. That was a scandal even the state HOA Oversight Committee couldn't ignore. Within 2 weeks, a formal hearing was scheduled. I testified. Julia testified. Celeste brought documentation. Even the former board member who'd resigned gave a statement, reluctantly but clearly, admitting Karen had been acting with full board knowledge during the integration initiative. The judge didn't even need a recess. He declared the Birchview Glen HOA temporarily suspended pending full audit and potential permanent dissolution. Karen's face in the courtroom, ashen, shaking, lips twitching with swallowed rage, was a moment I'll never forget. She had walked into our home like she owned it. Now she didn't even own her freedom. After court, Nate and I met with state officials who confirmed that based on the fraudulent annexation attempt and clear pattern of predatory behavior, I qualified for a unique status under Colorado property protection laws, permanent non-HOA, immunity. My property was now legally unincorporable into any association or residential governance structure, now or in the future, which meant they could never try this again. Not here, not with me, and not with anyone else without serious risk. But as Nate said, we're not done yet, because civil damages were next. And I intended to make sure every dollar they tried to earn off my family's home, they paid in full. The trial didn't last long. Karen Blackwood, once the self-crowned queen of Birchview Glen, was convicted on multiple counts: forgery, criminal trespass, attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit property conversion, and unlawful use of a residential property. Her defense team tried to argue misunderstanding, administrative overreach, and my personal favorite, well-intentioned community enhancement. None of it stuck. The jury saw the footage, heard the recordings, read the internal memos from her laptop. She was sentenced to 9 years in state prison with eligibility for parole in 6, but only if she complied with full restitution terms and refrained from further involvement in any residential governance or community organizations for the rest of her life. The courtroom was silent when the sentence was read. I wasn't. I exhaled. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without checking my cameras or looking over my shoulder at a passing HOA-branded SUV, but it didn't end there. The state issued a formal dissolution order for the Birchview Glen HOA. The charter was revoked, the board permanently disbanded, and the HOA's funds were frozen pending redistribution to dues-paying members. An independent audit was launched to investigate potential misuse of funds and the possibility of similar schemes in other neighborhoods. Turns out, Birchview Glen wasn't an isolated incident. 2 other properties, quiet owners too passive to question gifts from the HOA, had been quietly coerced into partial integration, their utilities rerouted, driveways repaved without permission, and documents altered behind closed doors. My case blew the whole thing wide open. In the months that followed, our quiet mountain neighborhood changed. The HOA signs came down. The compliance officers vanished. Karen's loyalists moved away one by one, some quietly, some not. The flyers stopped. The side eyes stopped. People began waving again. And me. I stayed. I rebuilt Julia's garden with help from neighbors who once kept their distance. One of them, Bill from 3 houses down, brought his teenage son over to help plant new tomato seedlings. He looked sheepish the whole time. "We believed her," he said. "We thought you were trying to wreck the community." I didn't say anything, just handed him a trowel. Zach came home to find a sign planted in the front yard next to the new roses. Private property. Ho, free zone. We like our peace. Try us. He thought it was hilarious. So did the local paper, who ran a follow-up article with a photo of it. The story went national for a week. Homeowner defeats HOA in staging scheme gone rogue. Some online forums started calling me the HOA Terminator. Someone even made a meme of me holding a weed trimmer like a shotgun with the words, "Get off my lawn," legally. I laughed. But the truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I'd been tested, my family had been targeted, my home had been invaded, and yet, we endured. We pushed back, not with shouting or vandalism or petty revenge. With cameras, court filings, logic, and backbone. Karen underestimated the one thing no HOA clause can regulate: ownership, not just the deed, the principle. My home is not a visual asset, it's where my son builds pillow forts and dreams of rockets. Where Julia brews coffee and plans next year's tomatoes, where we sit on the deck at dusk, watching the mountains turn gold. It's mine, and no committee, no resolution, no glossy folder of bylaws will ever change that. Let them knock. I'll never answer.